Sir, our orbital cannons just exploded from the inside. The commander's voice trembled as the hologram of the planetary war map flickered violently in front of him. We didn't even see him coming. Static crackled in the background, followed by another explosion, distant but too close. The Admiral stood frozen, sweat trailing down his temple. He turned toward the holocom and gave a command he thought he'd never utter. Send Mocker. Authorize total discretion. On the other end of the galaxy, far from the screaming soldiers and flaming bunkers, a scarred, half-machine man cracked his knuckles and smiled. About damn time. The Galactic Empire had seen countless uprisings, rebellions, and resistance cells. They had crushed thousands of colonies and vaporized entire continents when diplomacy failed. But Earth wasn't like the others. Earth didn't kneel, didn't beg. It just watched. Watched as their recon fleets vanished without a distress signal. Watched as the Empire's elite dropped onto the planet and never returned. Earth didn't broadcast threats. It didn't issue ultimatums. It simply waited. So when Admiral Voss's 28,000-man assault force landed in Sector 9 and went completely silent within 24 hours, the Empire panicked. Not officially, of course. Officially, they called it strategic repositioning. But privately, in rooms with layered encryption and 7 types of military clearance, the word used was infestation. Not by aliens. Not by machines. But by something the Imperial database labeled only as contingent anomaly, Raven. They needed a weapon that couldn't be reasoned with. One that didn't care about treaties or codes. One whose loyalty was strictly coin and chaos. That's when Mocker's name came up. Half cybernetic, entirely unhinged, he had earned his reputation by eliminating the draconian monarchs without even boarding their throne ship. He once wiped out a rebellion by dropping their moon on them. The files said he preferred clean kills, quick ops, and 0 survivors. But what made him terrifying wasn't the kill count. It was his policy. Every mission he set one rule. No interference. I go alone. I leave when I'm done. And I get paid whether you like how I did it or not. And they still hired him. Because right now, the Empire wasn't looking for control. They were looking for someone to survive Earth. When Mocker received the call, he was finishing off his drink in a gravity-free tavern inside a Starliner orbiting Vesh 12. The Empire's voice came through his neural calm, sterile and cold. Authorization Level 9. Target Earth. Contract includes planetary neutralization. Details follow. Mocker took a sip, tossed the glass into the air, and watched it shatter against the bulkhead. He answered without blinking. Earth, huh? Been a while. Double my usual rate. And don't follow me. If I catch so much as a probe tailing me, I turn around and drop a warhead on your palace. 3 days later, Mocker's stealth vessel tore through Earth's upper atmosphere cloaked in neutron scatter. He didn't come with armies. He didn't bring drones or mechs. Just a black armor shell molded directly to his skin, a pulse blade fused into his wrist, and a single silencer rifle made from fragments of destroyed alien civilizations. He landed silently near the charred remains of an Imperial cruiser and took in the scene. Ashes swirled in the wind. No signs of human life. But that wasn't the disturbing part. The disturbing part was the scorch marks on the cruiser, circular, surgical, like the hull had been eaten from the inside out. They're toying with us, he muttered. Let's see if they'll play with me. Far beneath the crust of Colorado, in a classified facility decommissioned on paper but pulsing with power and secret, a red light strobed inside a chamber sealed with 6 different biometric locks. A group of military officials stood in a semicircle, watching an old screen flicker with a coded message, Code Black, Mercenary deployed. They really hired Mocker. One general whispered, almost to himself. Another chuckled dryly. So they found religion. That man's a walking heresy. The room went silent as General Quan stepped forward. Activate Raven Protocol. A technician flinched. Sir, that program's been. Quan didn't raise his voice. I said activate it. Steel bolts unlatched. Air hissed. Somewhere deep in the mountain's veins, an ancient door cracked open. Inside, lit only by one flickering overhead bulb, sat a man cross-legged on a worn gym mat. His beard was coarse, his hair uneven, and his hands were wrapped like a prizefighter's. In front of him sat a chipped teacup and an open paperback titled Zen and the Art of Intergalactic War. He didn't look up when the door opened. He just said, "If someone's waking me up early again, it better not be for another asteroid drill simulation." The soldier who entered the chamber stood awkwardly. "Sir, the Empire sent Mocker." The man finally looked up. His eyes were ice. "Mocker? Thought he died in the Black Nebula conflict." "No, sir." He volunteered. "For Earth." The man stood slowly, bones cracking like old wood. He stretched, reached for a combat vest hanging on the wall, and grabbed a small leather pouch marked with old bloodstains. He slung it over his shoulder and looked at the soldier. "Tell command I need 2 grenades, a portable jammer, and an exact map of wherever that metal freak touched down." "Is that all?" "No." He paused. "And a sandwich. Turkey, if possible." Back in the field, Mocker was moving. He stepped through cratered landscapes, finding shredded bits of Empire-issued gear strewn like broken toys. He passed the helmet still twitching from residual energy discharge. No signs of gunfire. Just obliteration. Then he noticed the smell: charcoal, leather, and citrus. He narrowed his eyes. What kind of lunatic leaves citrus in a war zone? He didn't know it yet, but that was Raven's scent marker. Mocker activated his helmet's infrared scan and started walking faster. Halfway up the ridge, his sensors picked up a reading. Humanoid. Close. He raised his rifle, narrowed in, and the target vanished. Not moved. Vanished. A fraction of a second later, something buzzed behind his ear. A voice. Calm. Male. Human. "You're not used to being hunted, are you?" Mocker spun, pulse blade out. "Nothing. Just empty wind." He growled. "I've killed gods, freak. You think a whisper scares me?" The voice replied, faint but amused. "No. But the next 10 seconds will." At that moment, the ground under Mocker's foot collapsed. A magnetic trap snapped shut, disabling his right boot's stabilizer. A spike jutted up and pierced the outer edge of his armor. He growled, barely flinching, and ripped it out. But then the trees around him lit with red dots. Laser sim decoys. Not real weapons, just distractions. He scanned them, trying to isolate the source, but by the time he recalibrated, a small device landed at his feet. It was a pocket speaker. It clicked on. Raven's voice again. "Welcome to Earth. I hope you enjoyed the appetizer." Then it exploded, not in fire, but in smoke laced with sonar disruptors. Mocker's HUD fuzzed, rebooting in fragments. He stood coughing, weapon raised. "Cute trick," he muttered. "But you just told me where you are." And from the trees, a shadow moved silently, watched him for 2 seconds, then melted back into the darkness. Raven didn't need to strike yet. Not today. Today was about sending a message. This wasn't war. This was personal. And Earth had just called check. The blast had left a crater, not from its explosive power, but from its psychological impact. Mocker stood amid the fading sonar smoke, silent and calculating. His helmet recalibrated in microseconds, but it wasn't fast enough to mask the truth: he'd been touched. Not physically, but tactically. And for a man like Mocker, that was worse. He didn't mind getting hit. But being outplayed? That made his circuits twitch. He scanned the treeline again, this time with a broader filter, widening his radar's reach across the electromagnetic spectrum. Static. Nothing. Not even thermal echoes. As if the forest itself had been scrubbed clean. Whoever this Raven was, he wasn't hiding. He was erasing. Behind that silence, miles away, Raven watched through analog scopes. No drones, no satellite feeds, no digital assistants. Just old-school optics and muscle memory sharpened through decades of war no one even remembered. The enemy wasn't a horde. It was one man. But Raven never hunted numbers. He hunted arrogance. And Mocker was swimming in it. Watching the mercenary regroup, Raven whispered to himself, amused. He's fast. But he's still hunting in straight lines. The command team monitoring Raven from the underground base had limited contact. A single dead drop line updated them every few hours. No GPS. No streaming. Just one-way bursts of data. The last ping they received read, "Asset engaged. Commence blackout." General Quan stood behind the technician, arms folded. "How long until he sends the next message?" The tech shook her head. "There won't be one, sir. Not unless it's over." Quan didn't blink. "That's what worries me." Meanwhile, Mocker moved with surgical rhythm, cutting through branches, marking his path with invisible tracer mist. The Empire had given him toys, plasma filament snares, reverse temp shock mines, even grav distortion boots. None of it mattered if he couldn't pin down the ghost. He activated his secondary AI, a cold female voice known only as Iris. Query: Top 10 terrain-based ambush scenarios based on planetary warfare archives. Iris responded instantly. 78% likelihood subject will engage from higher ground with primitive explosive traps or tactical misdirection. Mocker snorted. Obvious. Predictable. Iris replied. Probability of underestimation fatal. He pressed on, climbing toward the ridgeline that gave him a view of the jungle valley below. From here, he could triangulate the sound origin from the earlier detonation. But before he could finish the calculation, the ridge gave way. It wasn't natural. Someone had loosened the stone and rigged a pressure-sensitive collapse. He slid halfway down the slope, caught himself with his gauntlet, and embedded the blade into the cliffside. As he dangled, stabilizing, a glint of movement caught his eye above. A figure. Barely visible. Watching him. Raven didn't move. He just stood at the edge of the opposite ridge, expression unreadable, like he wasn't looking at a threat, just something he hadn't yet decided how to break. Mocker shouted, "Come down and fight, coward!" Raven raised one hand. Not to wave. Not to point. Just a single middle finger, framed perfectly in silhouette, before vanishing into the trees again. Mocker growled as he pulled himself back up. Okay. You want a fight? You'll get one. While Mocker adapted his pursuit route, Raven moved deeper into his prepared zone. This wasn't just terrain. This was a graveyard of past campaigns, each tree and ridge layered with relics of forgotten battles. Raven had spent years studying how to kill machines with old-world tools. He'd once shorted a mech battalion using a bucket of salt water and a school bus battery. Today, he carried less gear, but more intent. A small EMP dart launcher, a coil of piano wire, and a pair of modified flare sticks he called his surgical reminders. He walked in near silence, except for the occasional sarcastic hum of an old Earth lullaby. It wasn't for comfort. It was psychological warfare. Every time Mocker picked up the tune on his scanners, he'd hear the same off-key 5 notes. Too close to ignore. Too random to trace. Mocker, now fully back on his feet, entered what appeared to be an abandoned logging site. Massive metal claws lay rusted, half buried in vines. A toppled loader machine creaked in the wind. He paused, then slowly approached the loader. His sensors indicated no life. But something was wrong with the temperature. The area was 5 degrees cooler than its surroundings. He opened his palm, activated a heat pulse, and fired it into the loader. Nothing. He stepped closer. That's when the claw swung. It wasn't from the loader. It was a manually triggered counterweight setup, buried and disguised as debris. The swing missed Mocker by inches, but the shockwave from its pass blew him backward into a tree. His armor held, but the blow cracked a rib and tore one of his exosockets. He lay stunned for a moment, breathing heavy, then sat up coughing. He laughed through blood. Cute. Very cute. Raven, once again watching from a distant outcrop, didn't smile. He didn't cheer. He simply checked his notes. This wasn't about punishing the mercenary. This was about measuring him, seeing where the cracks would form. Earth hadn't sent Raven to kill Mocker immediately. They sent him to test how much pain the machine could take before breaking its protocol. To see if the mercenary would ask for help. At that very moment, high in the orbital cloud above Earth, the Empire's closest recon satellite was hijacked. The feed was redirected to the Imperial War Table, where multiple high-ranking officials watched Mocker's struggle unfold live. "Why is he bleeding? Why isn't he using his drones?" one asked. Another simply stared, horrified. "He's not losing the fight. He's losing the narrative." The council debated whether to intervene. But there was a clause. Mocker had signed with total discretion. If they broke the contract, he could legally retaliate on them. "Let it play out," said the Chancellor. "Let's see what Earth's little monster really does." Down below, as night began to fall, Raven lit a single match and placed it beside a tripwire near an old tree stump. Not for warmth. For a shadow signal. Mocker would see it, and think Raven had made a mistake. That's what he wanted. Because sometimes the deadliest trap wasn't the wire, it was the moment when your enemy thought you were tired. And Raven was just getting started. Mocker approached the light cautiously, limping slightly, now silent and more alert. He drew his blade, eyes scanning every angle. The match flickered. He crouched near it and saw something etched into the bark above the flame. 2 words carved in perfect old Terran script, "Still watching." The message wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Raven had been there. And now, he wasn't. But he would be again. Mocker stood up slowly, looked into the darkness, and finally whispered what none of his enemies had ever heard him say before. "What are you?" Somewhere behind the trees, Raven whispered back, unheard but deliberate. "Worse than you." The forest had turned against him. Mocker, bruised and breathing harder than he had in a decade, leaned against a shattered boulder, his systems in mid-reboot. All around him were the remnants of human tools repurposed into death traps, tripwires made of fishing line, old rusted nails arranged under loose dirt, proximity sensors connected to flashbangs that disoriented rather than destroyed. None of it was high-tech. That was the worst part. He wasn't being outgunned. He was being outwitted. It was like trying to kill a shadow in a maze where every echo was a lie and every step could be your last. He stared at the tree with the carved message and clenched his jaw. "Still watching." The words felt more invasive than any bullet. He checked his internal diagnostics. His armor's right leg actuator was twitching from an overload. One visual sensor was cracked. And Iris, his AI assistant, was down for a cold restart. That meant no tactical overlays, no predictive routes, and no countermeasure suggestions. He was alone in the purest sense of the word, and for the first time since the Crimson contracts, he realized he was being hunted in a way he hadn't experienced before. Not for a bounty. Not for revenge. This was psychological. Raven wasn't just trying to kill him. He was trying to unravel him. Bit by bit. Cut by cut. Whisper by whisper. The night brought a new layer of challenge. Darkness wasn't a disadvantage to Raven, it was an amplifier. The jungle cooled quickly, and Mocker's infrared sensors flickered with interference, likely from localized heat decoys. Dozens of them. Each designed to mimic human heat signatures. He shot 3. None of them flinched. He switched to ultraviolet. Same issue. Raven had planned for every wavelength. So Mocker stopped relying on sensors. He switched to pure muscle memory and instinct. Every crunch of the ground beneath his boots was evaluated. Every movement was calculated. He no longer moved like a machine of war. He moved like prey adapting to its predator. Miles away, Raven crouched beside a small stream, wiping blood from his knuckles. It wasn't his own. Earlier, he'd planted a sonic disruptor that forced Mocker into a low-oxygen zone. The mercenary had survived, barely, but Raven had still gotten close enough to leave a mark, small, shallow, across the exposed section of Mocker's jaw where the helmet retracted during a heat vent cycle. A reminder. Not a kill shot. Just proof that the impossible wasn't immune. Raven sipped water from a crushed metal canteen and stared at his reflection in the ripples. His face was aged, eyes hollowed from years of silence, but there was something feral behind them, something that still smiled when challenged. Back at the base, General Quan received a short-wave burst from the forest's perimeter. One line. No context. Just coordinates. He cross-referenced them with the Empire's last known orbital scan of the area. When the technician confirmed the location, he raised a brow. He's leading him into the burned scar? The technician nodded. That region's been marked as uninhabitable since the defense collapse in the south reaches. Quan didn't answer immediately. Then, almost to himself, he said, Of course he is. He's not just fighting Mocker. He's baiting him into the one place where even machines lose their edge. The burned scar was a stretch of land covered in old electromagnetic residue and residual atmospheric discharge from Earth's early war with the first wave of extraterrestrial scouts. Nothing functioned there, not cleanly. Drones lost altitude, radios sputtered, and power cells drained within minutes. Mocker entered the edge of it before he realized the trees were different here, blackened at the root, twisted like fingers. His internal systems began to slow. HUD flickered. Armor charge dropped 5% in less than 10 steps. He should have turned back. But that wasn't Mocker's style. He didn't retreat. Not from any human. In the scar, Raven became invisible. He knew the terrain better than anyone. He'd trained in it. Fought in it. Bled in it. And buried 4 enemies in it without ever being spotted. He watched from above as Mocker trudged forward, slower now, breathing harder. No more taunting. No more bravado. The jungle had been a playground. The scar was the arena. Raven moved like a phantom, pressing fingers to hidden triggers as Mocker passed. A distant tree fell behind the mercenary, drawing his gaze. That's when Raven dropped from a ledge above, silent as smoke, landing 10 feet behind him. Mocker spun on instinct, but Raven was already gone. Not a full strike. Just a presence. A warning. Mocker's eyes scanned the ridgeline, finally yelling into the air. You think this makes you clever? You're not a soldier. You're a vandal with tricks. Raven's voice came from everywhere. You're right. I'm not a soldier. Soldiers follow rules. I don't. Mocker fired blindly into the trees. 5 rounds. One ricocheted and almost hit his own leg. He stopped. Listened. Breathing. Nothing. Until he turned again and saw something in the dirt, his own name, etched in the ash, followed by a smiley face. It was enough to make him curse, out loud, in 3 different languages. Then something new happened. A high-pitched tone in his ear. Iris was back online. She came back with a single update. Mental deterioration at 6%. Suggests strategic fallback. Mocker laughed. Noted. Rejected. Then he pulled the blade from his wrist and began cutting into his own shoulder, removing a damaged circuit node that was feeding corrupted signals into his neural interface. Blood mixed with oil. He cauterized the wound with a plasma coil. If he wants a hunt, he muttered, then he's going to get one. But Raven wasn't just hunting. He was layering trauma. He'd studied Mocker's files, tracked old mission logs, recreated holograms of past battlefields. And he just led the Mercenary to the wreckage of an old site Mocker had destroyed himself, an outpost that was never officially recognized, because the Empire had wiped it from their records after Mocker had taken out both enemy and friendly units during a contractual miscommunication. Raven had found it. And now it was a message board. As Mocker reached the site, he saw the words scrawled in paint across one broken wall panel: Collateral damage. He froze. This wasn't just about killing him anymore. It was about making him see everything he'd buried. He backed away from the panel, and as he did, a light rustle came from the side. He turned, this time quicker, and lunged. His blade connected. Flesh. A hit. But it wasn't Raven. It was a decoy. A life-sized mannequin dressed in Empire Scout armor, rigged with blood packs, recording gear, and a single message on Luke. Tag. You got one. But you're still losing. Mocker dropped to one knee. For the first time in his long, brutal career, he realized the war he'd signed up for wasn't winnable by force. He hadn't been hired to fight a battle. He'd been baited into a reckoning. And Raven? He was just getting warmed up. Somewhere high above the scarred forests of Earth, orbiting in the Empire's classified observation deck, an Imperial analyst stared at the latest feed with a look that hovered between disbelief and dread. What had started as a mercenary contract was now playing out like a dark legend. The room behind her buzzed with low murmurs and data scrolling across dozens of holoscreens. They were watching what they believed would be a demonstration of superiority, a reminder that the Empire could erase planets at will. Instead, they were watching the slow dismantling of their finest weapon by a man the galaxy hadn't seen in over 2 decades. They couldn't turn away. Not because they wanted to witness victory, but because no one could believe what they were seeing. Mocker was limping, bleeding, talking to himself. And Earth's ghost hadn't even drawn a gun yet. General Vrax paced in circles near the command podium, his voice cold and clipped. Why hasn't he called for extraction? One of the techs replied, hesitant. Protocol forbids it, sir. He insisted on full discretion. Any interference would nullify the contract and grant him legal retaliation rights. Another officer added more carefully. And he might be too proud. That made the room pause. The Empire had hired a monster too arrogant to retreat, and pitted him against a man with no concept of failure. They weren't watching a battle anymore. They were watching a slow, strategic execution. On the surface, the burned scar howled with rising winds. Ash twisted like ghosts in the gusts, spiraling around fractured buildings and collapsed satellite towers. Mocker knelt behind a piece of shattered hull, running a makeshift field repair on his damaged exosuit. His hand shook as he welded the circuit line. Not from fear. From accumulated shock trauma. The traps weren't killing him. But they were breaking him, by volume, by rhythm, by silence. Every trap came without warning, every movement stalked by shadows. His own breath echoed louder than his pulse, and that was the true danger. The moment a hunter starts hearing himself louder than his surroundings, he's no longer the one in control. Far across the ridge, Raven crouched beneath a blackened overhang, watching through an old spotting scope. He didn't need high-tech gear. He didn't want thermal readings or satellite visuals. What he needed was rhythm, prediction, pattern. Mocker was changing. Not drastically. Just enough to show where. His footsteps weren't as measured. His approach wasn't as tight. He moved like a man recalculating after being proved wrong. Raven noted every detail in silence, then pulled a pin from the pouch at his side. A flare, not for signaling, but for manipulation. He tossed it into a clearing near the east side of the scar, where the wind would carry the smoke against the slope. Mocker saw it immediately. To him, the flare meant something new. It meant movement. Possibly retreat. Possibly distraction. He moved, faster now, following the trail. Raven led him. That part wasn't the trap. The trap was what came after. The flare's casing, once ejected and embedded in the dirt, began to pulse with subsonic waves. Just low enough to confuse directional sound processing. As Mocker chased the light, every step twisted his orientation slightly. The forest began to bend inward, like it was folding around him. He didn't notice until he was surrounded by trees that didn't match the topography from earlier. He paused, eyes darting. Then the rustling began. Branches snapped behind him. Leaves stirred unnaturally. He turned with his blade up. Nothing. Then from the left. Then from the rear again. The sounds came faster. Louder. His HUD scrambled. Mocker yelled, finally slashing at the air, his pulse blade hissing in the darkness. A shape darted past him, too quick to catch. He spun, stabbed, and hit only bark. Then another shape. And another. Always just outside his reach. Then, without warning, the forest went still. From behind one of the trees, a voice came. Calm. Controlled. Tell me, Mocker, what does the Empire pay for a man's soul these days? Mocker fired his rifle blindly into the voice. 4 shots. The 5th jammed. A soft chuckle followed. I figured. He threw the gun down and drew both blades. Show yourself, he growled, his breathing heavy. You want to fight? I'm standing right here. Silence. Then a whisper. Not yet. Raven stepped into view for the first time in full. No mask. No armor. Just a man in tattered fatigues, holding a short combat knife in one hand and a smoke capsule in the other. He wasn't posturing. He wasn't smirking. He simply stared at Mocker with eyes that didn't blink. Mocker took 1 step forward. Raven didn't move. You're unarmed, Mocker said. Raven responded softly. No. You are. You just don't know it yet. Mocker lunged. The two collided in a burst of ash and wind, blades clashing, fists flying. It wasn't a soldier's duel. It was pure aggression meeting pure restraint. Raven didn't fight with rage. He fought with rhythm, like he was dancing to a drum only he could hear. Every time Mocker struck, Raven redirected. Every time he lunged, Raven sidestepped. The mercenary's strikes were powerful enough to split metal. But Raven wasn't metal. He was pressure. Constant. Subtle. Breaking from inside. After a brutal exchange, Mocker managed to land a shoulder hit that sent Raven tumbling across the dirt. For a second, he thought he'd finally found a gap. He raised his blade high and charged. But then his leg buckled. He dropped to one knee. No injury. Just failure. His armor systems blinked red. Battery drained. Raven had led him just far enough into the scar's dead zone. He'd let him swing and burn energy until the exosuit gave up. Raven stood, brushing ash off his arm. That suit was never going to save you. You built your whole legend on firepower. But you're not a warrior. You're a weapon. A sharp one. But a weapon still. Mocker didn't respond. He was trying to reboot the core manually now, fingers twitching over internal panel keys. Raven stepped closer. They didn't send you here to win. They sent you to scare us. To make Earth kneel. He knelt beside Mocker now. But Earth doesn't kneel. Earth waits. Earth watches. And when it's time, Earth ends things. Mocker, eyes locked with Raven's, rasped out a final word. Kill me. Raven tilted his head slightly. Not yet. From behind the trees, a low hum started to rise. A repurposed drone, ancient and barely functional, hovered into view carrying a transmitter box. It began to stream. The footage of Mocker, broken, disarmed, defeated, would reach every Empire feed within minutes. Not edited. Not filtered. Just the truth. Their champion was beaten by a ghost they thought didn't exist. Mocker slumped as Raven stood. This isn't about your death, Raven said. It's about their illusion shattering. And above the world, across the galaxy, the illusion was already breaking. The silence that followed wasn't victory. It wasn't peace. It was the sound of a legend crumbling. Mocker sat in the ash, knees bent, one hand still twitching near his blade though he no longer had the strength to lift it. His armor was dead weight now, blinking red warnings in its final flickers before going completely dark. Across from him, Raven remained still, watching. Not gloating. Not savoring. Just studying. As if even now, the fight wasn't over. Not because Mocker could still fight, but because there was still a message to finish delivering. The Empire's feed had gone live 10 minutes earlier, and the entire galaxy was watching. No edits. No commentary. Just raw footage of a man once feared across systems, now kneeling on human soil, defeated by someone the Empire thought extinct. Up in the orbiting command ship, the silence was different. Tense. Hollow. Generals stared at the screen without speaking. No one issued orders. No one could. The man they had sent to erase Earth had been unmade with his own arrogance. One counselor finally whispered, "Cut the feed." But no one moved to obey. Another said what they were all thinking. Cut it now, and the public thinks we're hiding something. Leave it up, and we admit we lost. There was no protocol for this. They had no countermeasure for humiliation. Down below, the last traces of sunlight faded into a burnt orange dusk, and the air grew colder. Raven looked down at Mocker, still breathing, barely. They'll send another. Mocker rasped, his voice cracked from dehydration and smoke. They always do. Raven nodded slightly. Maybe. But not for a while. Not after this. He didn't say it with pride. He said it like fact. The kind that didn't need flair or ceremony. Just a statement laid bare, impossible to deny. Mocker tried to rise, failed, and collapsed back to the dirt. His systems were fried, but his mind was clearer than it had ever been. Raven hadn't just defeated him. He had dismantled everything he believed about warfare. Power, tech, fear, none of it had helped. He hadn't been outmatched in strength. He'd been outthought. And in that moment, something twisted in his chest. A dark, quiet understanding. They'll bury me for this, he muttered. If I go back, I'm done. Raven crouched beside him, looked him in the eye, and said, Then don't go back. Mocker blinked slowly. You suggesting I defect? Raven shrugged. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just pointing out your options. Go back and be their shame. Stay here, and maybe learn something that doesn't end in fire. Mocker laughed, a broken, bitter sound. You think I can just disappear? Raven stood, dusting off his hands. I did. Behind them, the sound of engines hummed low. A black transport vessel rose from the tree lean, old, rust-patched, and human-made. Its back ramp opened slowly. Raven turned and walked toward it. At the top stood a woman in an old military jacket, hand on her hip, rifle slung lazily over her shoulder. Took you long enough, she called down. Raven smiled faintly. Traffic. The ramp hissed as he walked up. He paused at the top, turned back toward Mocker. The mercenary hadn't moved, but his eyes were still locked on Raven. What's your real name? He asked. Raven paused. The question hung in the air longer than expected. Finally, he answered, just loud enough to carry. Calder. Then he stepped inside the ship. Mocker lay there, alone now, surrounded by the remains of everything he thought made him invincible. Night crept fully over the landscape, but no beasts emerged. No enemies struck. Just the wind, the ash, and the quiet churn of consequences. Somewhere above, satellites continued to capture his image, feeding it into the networks faster than the Empire could shut them down. On fringe worlds, people gathered in bars and transport stations to watch the footage play on loops. On mining colonies, the workers cheered. On occupied zones, the resistance watched with new fire in their eyes. It wasn't the defeat of Mocker they cared about. It was what it meant. Earth, long dismissed as backward and obsolete, had just become something else, something no one dared laugh at anymore. Hours passed before a recovery team was dispatched from the Empire's border command post. They found Mocker exactly as the feed showed, broken, quiet, his systems drained. He didn't resist. Didn't speak. He let them lift him into the medpod without a word. But as they closed the lid, one of the soldiers noticed something strange. Mocker was holding something small in his fist. When pried open, it revealed a strip of cloth, faded, torn, marked with human military insignia. Raven had left it there. A reminder. Or maybe an invitation. Back in deep orbit, the Empire was scrambling. Propaganda wings were already spinning the footage into half-truths. Mercenary overexerted in high radiation zone, some said. Non-sanctioned engagement, no strategic failure, said others. But the people had already seen too much. The cracks were showing. Recruitments dropped. Outer Rim governors began delaying supply shipments. Mercenary guilds quietly removed Earth from their active campaign boards. No one wanted to be next. Earth wasn't defended by legions. It was defended by the unknown. Far from the noise, in a remote canyon hidden between ancient Earth ridges, Raven stood near a small garden. Nothing special. Just a few vegetables, a rusted bench, and a steel shed covered in moss. He reached down, checked the soil, watered one row of greens, then sat. The woman from the transport, his handler, old war friend, maybe more, brought him a flask. So, she said, sitting beside him. You're the boogeyman again. Raven didn't smile. He just sipped from the flask and looked up at the stars. Let them think whatever they want. She nudged him. So, what now? You gonna go off-grid again? Hide in the trees? Build more traps for ghosts that won't come? He shook his head slowly. No. They will come. Eventually. But next time, they'll remember this. And maybe, just maybe, they'll think twice. She leaned her head against his shoulder. And if they don't? He let out a slow breath. Then I'll remind them. A breeze rolled through the canyon, quiet but steady. Above them, the stars blinked like old friends returning. The galaxy was changing. Lines were being redrawn. Fear was shifting its center. And for the first time in a long while, Earth wasn't the one looking over its shoulder. It was the one being watched. In the shed, beside old gear and weather-beaten maps, sat a helmet. Not Raven's. Mockers. Scorched, dented, and resting on a wooden spike like a trophy, or maybe a warning. Below it, etched into the metal, were 3 words written in perfect silence. You started this.